Yeah, so I want to make a game. And yes, I know, a guy who has milk associated with him making games. Seems kind of familiar, doesn't it? But, in the words of Dani himself, bippity bop it. But unlike Dani, I have a severe lack of skill when it comes to game creation and coding. But let's start at the beginning. I started my game making journey around 2 years ago when I sat down, probably watching a Dani video, and said, I could do that. I couldn't. I started with a simple idea. I'm gonna make a 2D platformer game where you run from a giant alligator in Jacksonville, Florida. I don't know why this was my first idea. It just was. Then I realized I needed to actually know how to code in order to make games. And so I looked up coding tutorials and went, yeah, no. So I downloaded Unreal Engine instead, and began learning how to use their plug-and-play code, because up until that point, my only quote-unquote coding knowledge was from Scratch, Minecraft command blocks, and the Overwatch Workshop. So I was basically a coding genius. Once I got into Unreal, I realized maybe the Florida Gator game idea wasn't really a good one. I know. Maybe next time, sweet prince. My next idea I had was to make a game about cowboys who shoot guns, cause who doesn't like cowboys? And then after working for about 3 months on a small project, I realized shooting guns was boring. So I made a new game, the game I'm working on right now. And guess what? I gave the cowboy a sword. Yeah, that was about it. So now that you've got all the background info, let's get into my actual full-scale idea for what this new unnamed game project actually is. I'm working on a boss rush type game, inspired by games like Hollow Knight and Cuphead, which if you've seen my channel before, you may know I've taken a liking to. The basic idea so far is that you play the game as this, entity, it doesn't really have a name for the time being, and you are a bounty hunter. And so, as a bounty hunter, of course, you hunt bounties, and these bounties will be the various bosses throughout the game. So there you have it. There's the very basic idea of the game. Of course, I have a lot more ideas for actual story, lore, and other stuff, but I'll keep most of that to myself for the time being, because it seems like I end up rewriting the entire story every other day. And just a small preface before I get into showing all of the work I've done for the game so far, I'd like to say that any and all suggestions and comments about the game are appreciated and needed. Things like suggesting characters to add and names for the game and its characters will be very crucial and are the main reason I'm making these devlogs. So if you've got something to say, please let me know with a comment. You can also talk to me directly and get immediate updates on changes in my game if you join my Discord server, the link is in the description. Now, let me show you how my game has evolved over the last couple months of me working on it on and off. I started with the character's basic movement. I started tweaking his speed, his jump height, gravity, and gave him the ability to double jump to add even more movement to his kit. My main idea with the game was to have the player utilize a lot of fun movement and flashy, cool looking attacks. Basically, I just want you to feel like a badass. I also added sliding to the game, cause what good movement game doesn't have sliding? For the next bits of footage you're about to see, keep in mind, because I wasn't too sure how far I'd get making my game, I didn't exactly record everything I did, so there's a massive time skip in changes, but I'll do my best to sort of explain what's changed. So yeah, it looks a bit different. For starters, the main thing you'll probably notice is that the background now looks like something a 4-year-old would draw on their menu at Friendly's, and the ground looks like it went through a firing range. Don't worry, both of those things got changed shortly after. I also added a health system to the player, opting in for hearts, as I think a heart system can usually make a game more challenging, as seen with stuff like Hollow Knight and Cuphead. And another main goal of my game that I didn't mention was that I want the bosses to be difficult. I don't want no pushover bosses, no. If I'm making a boss rush game, I want these to be hard bosses. Bosses that make you feel very rewarded after beating them. Bosses that have lots of story to each of them. Bosses that you can remember distinctly. So I think going for a heart system and making the player have very limited health, at least early on, is a good way at going about this. I'm sure people have different opinions on the blue color for them, so I'd love to hear what you think in the comments. Another thing you might notice here is that the player can actually attack now, so that's cool. I also added a dash and made my first low-tier enemy. So yes, the plan currently is to have some small enemies and some portions of 2D platforming in the game, forcing the player to traverse areas in order to locate and kill their bounty target. Of course, I think the platforming and exploring will probably take a backseat to the bosses, but I think it's both a good way to build up anticipation for a fight, it also explains a way for the player to actually get to the fights without just having them TP there, for instance. So yes, this was my first enemy. What is it? Well, I'm not too sure. I asked my friends for some names, and they suggested the following: Slap, Pitch, Silicone, and Trotter. All fantastic names, I must say. There are also a couple of other NPC-type characters I had designed and kind of grown attached to by this point in the process. So I'd like to introduce you to Arduino and Sigi. Arduino is a worm. That's about all the lore I've got so far. And Sigi is a cigarette who my friend Lucas suggested was a part of the gang called the Pack. And I don't know what that entails yet, but the idea was just too good to pass up. In this next video clip, we skip a few months ahead to another couple of small changes. For starters, the HUD has now been set up. I went for a very minimalist HUD, modeling those of Cupheads and Hollow Knights, having literally everything the player needs just be in the top left. Each part of it represents a different thing. A lot of these things I haven't even shown off yet, so without any further ado, the skull glass filling up with beer represents your ultimate, the red eyes of the skull represent your parry timer, the gray bar is your dash reset, and of course, the hearts are your health. I also changed the entire background to look much better, and fixed the sand to not look riddled with shrapnel. I also added a heavy attack to the game to kind of switch up your attack styles. It doesn't keep you in the air as long, it slows you down immensely, but offers superior range and damage. I also discovered a glitch where if you jumped up and pressed the slide button at the same time, with precise timing, your character would do a super slide, where you would go extremely fast. And I know how to fix it, but I don't think I'm going to, because it's really fun to do. And now we're in the present day build of the game, and I'm going to run through a couple of the final few details that have been added to the game since that last clip from a month ago. I added a bunch of new details to the environment, mostly because when I looked into how to make a parallax background on Unreal Engine, I couldn't figure out how to make it work well with what I was going for. And so instead, in order to try and make the world feel a little bit more alive, I had to add other random details like randomized cloud generation, moving grass in the background, and random tumbleweeds, which I think add a little bit more atmosphere to the game. But feel free to suggest anything I could add to make the world feel a little bit more alive in the comments. I also opted out of having black outlines around every character. I instead changed them to just darker outlines of the inside color, which made the game look so much better in my opinion, and let me put in more details in such a small workspace. But, now onto the thing that most of you are probably here for, the first boss. As you already saw from the thumbnail, the first boss I'm making is a serial killer banjo, who goes by the alias 12-string. Because he's a 12-string banjo. They're real. I'm not crazy. They're real. Look it up. Look it up. But anyway, I drew up this concept for the character a couple months back and kind of fell in love with the absolute chaotic nature he spouted. And so I gave him 6 guns. Yep. The whole idea for this boss fight was to just make it a bullet hell, as you could probably tell from the guns all over him, an obvious Enter the Gungeon inspiration. So I got to work adding an attack for each of the guns, adding a boss health bar, adding a bunch of custom animations for starting the battle, adding an interactable object, and then bam! It all came together, and here is the final result. I'll just let this footage run in the background while I continue to speak because there are no sound effects in the game yet, so just leaving you watching a hollow boss fight would be kind of awkward. Also, the boss is not done yet, I still have lots of work to do, and would appreciate any suggestions you may have about the fight and ways to make it better. I also haven't made a death animation yet, and that's mostly due to me not knowing whether I'm going to do a second phase or not. I've already got one kind of planned out, but don't know how much of that I'd be willing to show off right now. You know, I gotta keep some things secret. I've actually got a lot of cool boss ideas thought up, and different areas and creatures I've already sketched out that I can't wait to show off in the future. But, for the time being, I hope you have enjoyed what you saw, and I hope that you see enough potential in my funny little game to support me through it. I mean, the fact you got this far is proof enough, so thank you. And I hope to see you in the next one where I design a guitar boss with katanas on meth.